Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We have a lot to catch up on, unpacking 4 days of news here in what was in fact a very busy Thanksgiving weekend in the world of politics, culminating with the announcement last evening by Joe Biden offering a full and unconditional pardon to his son Hunter. This is something that, of course, came late yesterday and has been driving the news ever since, following word earlier in the weekend that Donald Trump was tapping Kash Patel to be the next director of the FBI, even though we already have a director of the FBI. And potentially connecting some of the dots here might be part of our job today, knowing that retribution and the dismantling of the agency that he has been tapped to run is part of the charge if Kash Patel is in fact confirmed. I want to start, though, with our conversation on this pardon from Joe Biden, who has just touched down in Africa, as a matter of fact, on a 3-day trip. He left the country shortly after issuing this unconditional pardon. Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg's Washington senior editor, is with us, helping to drive our political coverage from Washington. Wendy, it's great to have you. The scope and breadth of this pardon is what is making news almost as much as the fact that Joe Biden essentially changed his mind on this, turned on his pledge to never issue a pardon to Hunter Biden. What changed?
You know, we've seen some, it's hard to tell, Joe, but we've seen some reporting that suggests that the family got together over Thanksgiving and talked it out, and the president just decided to throw everything he has said, his tradition of upholding institutions, his tradition since he was a 29-year-old senator of, coloring within the lines, and pardoning his son for a number of felonies related to gun and tax charges. It was really a stunning reversal of everything we've known Joe Biden to stand for. And then literally moments later, an hour later maybe, he leaves for Africa. You can really tell this guy is done with his job.
I guess things are winding down, Wendy, and knowing that there will likely be more pardons to follow, we keep our focus on this one. Hunter Biden was facing 2 separate sentencings this month on the convictions that we've already discussed. Some gun charges here, 3 felony gun charges, as well as the federal tax crimes that he pleaded guilty to. There was a thought, Wendy, that there might be more where these came from, because the pardon covers more than just these.
Well, that is the indication that there might have been more coming. This pardon covers everything he might have done in the decade between 2014 and 2024. And so who knows what those, other charges might have been or might not have been. There might have been nothing and he just wanted to keep it, very tightly wrapped. But it was an unusual pardon even for presidents who pardon a lot of people, including Donald Trump, who has pardoned a number of friends and relatives his first term.
That's true. The Kushners and Steve Bannons of the world, however, don't seem to match up to this because of the full-throated nature of the pardon and the fact that Joe Biden said he would never do it. Some Democrats aren't happy. It's not just Republicans raising eyebrows here, Wendy. The governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, who, by the way, was a surrogate for the Harris campaign, called it, quote, a bad precedent, could be abused by later presidents, and will sadly tarnish his reputation. Unquote. Pretty tough stuff. Greg Stanton, the first Democratic lawmaker from the House of Representatives to speak up, said Hunter committed felonies and was convicted by a jury of his peers. Remembering that Joe Biden ran on the fact that no one was above the law. It was what was supposed to make him different than Donald Trump. What does this tell us now about the way he'll be remembered?
Well, it couldn't have been a bigger gift for Donald Trump if he had wrapped it up and put it under the tree. I mean, it gives Donald Trump every political avenue to say, see, even Joe Biden says his DOJ is weaponized. And look, he's favoring his son. It was a really, a really strong political decision to just sort of drop this grenade and walk out of the presidency, because It's a message to people who have drug addictions and have gone to prison, who do not get pardoned by the president. It is a message to tax evaders that they can get away, that they can't get away with it, but the president's son can. And again, just a real gift to Donald Trump. And his team didn't waste a moment last night coming out and saying exactly that.
The take from Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg's Washington senior editor. Wendy, it's great to see you and appreciate the insights as we add a voice of experience. I've been looking forward to the conversation with Nick Akerman, the former federal prosecutor, former assistant special Watergate prosecutor, former assistant U.S. attorney, is with us. Nick Akerman, great to see you and welcome back. Wendy just described this pardon as a grenade. How would you?
Well, I think you have to really look at what's going on here. To me, it's not so much a grenade. I think what President Biden realized was that Hunter Biden was going to be in the target of Donald Trump's retribution. And if he went through the criminal justice system and continued, was sentenced to prison, which he very well could have been sentenced on the tax case for a period of time, he then would be at the mercy of Donald Trump's Justice Department and Bureau of Prisons. And this would have given Donald Trump the opportunity to do what they did to his former attorney, Michael Cohen, where they put him in solitary confinement, where when he was released to go home because of the COVID epidemic, he was put back into prison again out of spite to keep him from publishing a book. So I think what's really going on here is if Joe Biden had actually won not Joe Biden, but Harris had won the election, I don't think there would be a pardon. But I don't think he really trusts a Justice Department that's headed by Pam Bondi, Donald Trump's two defense lawyers from New York, and Kash Patel, who is going to be the FBI director, to give anybody a fair shake in the system. And for that reason, I think that is why he ultimately decided to pardon his son.
Well, okay, so you're answering one of the questions that I have been asking Nick Akerman. It's these appointments that made the difference. When the Biden family sat down for Thanksgiving on Nantucket, they had the big family conversation. That's what was different. And then you add Kash Patel over the weekend, and Joe Biden started writing this pardon. Is that how it went in your mind?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, what would you do if it was your son and you knew that the guy who was going to be president next had already threatened retribution against you and your son, the very son that Donald Trump sent Rudy Giuliani halfway across the world to Ukraine to try and dig up dirt on him, and absolutely got nothing, but went to those lengths and has already threatened retribution against the Bidens. What would you do under these circumstances, knowing that the Justice Department was going to be totally manned by political hacks who are answerable to Donald Trump?
I'm going to ask you about some of these appointments because I'm really curious to get your take. Joe Biden wrote, though, and I just want to get your take as a former prosecutor. He wrote in his statement, "No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son. And that is wrong," he said. "In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me." Now, clearly this is personal for Joe Biden, but what does the prosecutor in you say when you read that?
Well, there's a little bit of truth here. First of all, as to the gun violation, no one is ever prosecuted for that by itself. It's always in connection with something with drugs or some other act. When you have something here where Hunter Biden had the gun for only 10 days, never did anything with it, it really does raise a question as to whether or not he would have ever been prosecuted, but for the fact he was the son of the president. As to the tax violations, even that raises some issues. Don't forget, during that period of time where he didn't report income, he was a drug addict. He later paid back all of the tax it was due and owing. Pretty unusual for the Department of Justice to prosecute somebody under those circumstances. Not totally, though, out of the ordinary. But again, it does raise a question as to whether or not, if he were not the son of the president, that he would not have been prosecuted for these tax violations. So there is some truth to that. We don't really know the answer to it. but it's not off the wall, put it that way.
I want to ask you about the aforementioned Kash Patel and some of the other appointments that we have learned about the past few days in the wake of Matt Gaetz withdrawing his name for consideration as the next Attorney General. Patel is the most recent to be the next FBI director. And the reaction that we've heard from even just the Republican side of the aisle has been remarkable. Not so much about Patel, Nick, but about the man who has the job now, the FBI director, Chris Wray. Chuck Grassley, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, incoming, said on X, Chris Wray has failed at fundamental duties of FBI director. He's shown disdain for congressional oversight and has not lived up to his promises. Fast forward to Sunday morning television, Mike Rounds, Republican senator, said this about Mr. Wray.
Chris Wray, who the president nominated the first time around, and I think the president picked a very good man to be the director of the FBI when he did that in his first term. When we meet with him behind closed doors, I've had no objections to the way that he's handled himself. And so I don't have any complaints about the way that he's done his job right now.
Nick Akerman, what do you make of this? And is Chris Wray suddenly going to resign? Can Donald Trump fire him? I ask you this because you have real memories of the Saturday Night Massacre.
Oh, of course. No, he could resign, but I don't think he would, and he shouldn't. I think he should hang in there. The whole point behind Chris Wray being appointed to a 10-year term, Congress changed that a few years back in order that the FBI director would be out of the politics of the situation. The idea was that he'd be appointed by a president, could be removed only for misconduct. Certainly, there's been no misconduct on his part. Everybody says, except for a few partisans, that he has done a good job. And there's no reason to fire him. The whole idea is you want somebody as director of the FBI who is independent, is not beholden to the president, and handles his job in a way that makes the public feel that he's doing the right thing and he's not doing it for politics. Certainly, Christopher Wray cannot be criticized for doing anything that was political. He's done it by the book. He's been a good director. And I think putting somebody in who, again, is a total political hack, has no experience in this area whatsoever, other than to carry out Donald Trump's retribution, is really reprehensible.
Well, this is a 10-year term, right? That was the whole point, is that they would outlast any particular president. And I believe that comes from Watergate, which you are intimately familiar with here. Does
Correct.
Chris Wray just hold the line? What if he doesn't leave?
Well, I think he should hold the line, and he forced Donald Trump to fire him if that's what Donald Trump is going to do. I mean, the president does have the right under the statute to fire the FBI director. But the reason that he's doing it is really reprehensible. The idea that he wants somebody in office that's going to act to carry out his retribution against his political enemies is not the kind of person that you want as director of the FBI.
Well, I mentioned Chuck Grassley. He may not be a Chris Wray fan, but he's a big Pam Bondi fan. And he is walking her through the halls of the Senate today and this week ahead of her confirmation hearings. What is your thought on an Attorney General Bondi and the change that she would bring to the Justice Department?
Well, she is somebody that is not going to have any independence whatsoever. She's going to do whatever Donald Trump asks her to do. She was involved in his past two political campaigns and runs for president. Before he ran for president, Pam Bondi was investigating Trump University. But after she got a $25,000 contribution from Donald Trump for her campaign, she suddenly dropped that investigation. So again, we're looking at somebody who is not an independent actor, who is really going to be just an arm of Donald Trump's retribution campaign, and is not going to instill a lot of confidence in our justice system being meted out equally and fairly to everybody.
But after Matt Gaetz, now Kash Patel, some of the others that I could mention, she suddenly looks like captain of Team Normal, right, Nick? She gets confirmed.
Well, she may, but I think if the Senate does their job, they ought to be looking at this issue of independence. Are the people in the Department of Justice acting independently from the president, as all of these attorney generals have done since the time of Watergate. That has been the standard. That has been the norm. Instead, what Donald Trump has done is he's installed an attorney general. He's installed a deputy attorney general that was his criminal defense lawyer. His aide, it was the other criminal defense lawyer. And now you've got Kash Patel. What you have are all political appointments that are beholden to Donald Trump, that will essentially do whatever Donald Trump asks them to do. And why that is so dangerous is because Donald Trump has promised to perpetrate retribution on his political enemies. And the place that he can do it from, and do it most easily, is the Department of Justice.
Nick, we've only got a minute left. We started with the pardon of Hunter Biden. How many more will we hear from Joe Biden?
Oh, I don't think you're going to get much more. That was it. I mean, I think he came to the realization that he was putting his son in real jeopardy to leave him in the, confines of the Justice Department that is going to be run by Donald Trump. With those 4 or 5 appointments, I wouldn't trust anybody to get a fair shake from that department.
Nick Akerman, founder of the law office of Nick Akerman, former Watergate prosecutor. It's great to see you, and welcome back, Nick, to the conversation. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington on the fastest show in politics, with much more on the pardon and the transition. We'll get into these names that we heard over the weekend, including Kash Patel, with our signature panel coming up. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us right here on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's the Monday edition, and we're glad to have you with us here as we unpack 4 days worth of news. Not only the Hunter Biden pardon, but much more news when it comes to the transition of the incoming Trump administration, much of which we were just talking about with Nick Akerman. This White House has made pretty clear, and in the statement written by Joe Biden, reinforced today by Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, that this pardon may not have happened if Donald Trump had not been elected. Nick Akerman said that flat out just now here on Bloomberg, the former Watergate prosecutor, making it clear that if Kamala Harris had won, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And it has everything to do with Donald Trump's approach to the Department of Justice, says Nick Akerman, and the people he's choosing to run it and agencies like the FBI. That was a big moment over the weekend when Donald Trump tapped Kash Patel to be the next FBI director, a critic of the deep state, a loyalist at Mar-a-Lago, and one who could bring real change here to the nation's preeminent law enforcement agency, of course, depending on who you ask. Not everybody loves this idea. Some Republicans are concerned about Patel, his potential to run the agency. They're also concerned about the fact that we already have an FBI director in Christopher Wray, who would either have to resign or be fired by Donald Trump. Questions to Republican senators who will have to confirm so many of these names, including Bill Haggerty, the Republican from Tennessee, was asked about Patel on Meet the Press yesterday. Listen.
President Trump is entitled to name his appointees. That is exactly what he's doing, and I'm going to support this appointment. Kash has worked in national security. He's worked at the Department of Justice, and he's somebody that has been willing to uncover the wrongs at the FBI. He's the one that uncovered for the American public what happened with Russiagate. He's the one that can see through the fix here.
This is where we begin our conversation with our signature political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. He, of course, partner at Stone Court Capital. She is political science professor at Iona University. And great to have both of you with us here following what I hope was a great and long weekend for both of you. Rick Davis, your take on this latest naming of names by Donald Trump. Washington has moved on from Matt Gaetz. We're talking about Pam Bondi now running the Department of Justice. But a Kash Patel who has vowed to dismantle the FBI would mean what for the agency?
Yeah, look, I think this is Donald Trump making good on his campaign promises. He said he was going to disrupt the FBI. He felt like the FBI has waged a 8-year war against him. starting with the Russia hoax, as he puts it, and going all the way through the Biden administration. So you can call it wanting to disrupt the government bureaucracy or retribution, whatever makes you tick. But I think it is important, the clip you played of Senator Haggerty, because Haggerty is a loyalist with Donald Trump in the United States Senate, but he's a reasonable, thoughtful guy. And the fact that he's willing to stick his neck out to blaze a trail for Kash Patel in the Senate means more likely that he is going to get through a confirmation hearing, assuming, as you point out, that there's a vacancy, because Donald Trump appointed the current FBI director, and he'll have to probably fire him in order to get a vacancy for Kash Patel. All of that is yet to be done, and obviously can't happen until he takes the oath of office.
Yeah, and the dismantling of Christopher Wray is apparently going to precede the dismantling of the agency. Look no further than Chuck Grassley, Jeanne, Zaino, the incoming head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's walking Pam Bondi through the halls of the Senate here on X. Quote, Chris Wray has failed at fundamental duties of FBI director. He's shown disdain for congressional oversight and has not lived up to his promises. It's time to chart a new course for transparency, accountability at FBI. That's a pretty stark reaction when we hear the likes of Mike Rounds, for instance, saying that Christopher Wray, I believe he said, a very good man, he said, picked a very good man to be director when he did it in the first term. This was a Trump appointee. What did Christopher Wray do to deserve being fired?
Yeah, it's very unclear. And you hear that statement by Chuck Grassley. You'd like to know exactly what he's speaking to, beyond the fact that Donald Trump doesn't like him now, even though he appointed him. And, you know, if you take what Chuck Grassley is saying at his word, okay, somehow Christopher Wray has failed and needs to be fired. Who is he appointing but Kash Patel, who has almost no experience and certainly doesn't have the temperament? This is somebody who has been going around talking about QAnon conspiracies and the fact that people in elected office and celebrities are engaged in a massive child sex trafficking arrangement, and that the deep state is trying to dethrone Donald Trump. You know, Joe, he writes children's books when he gets out of the White House. And these children's books are worth looking at, if just because they're stunning to the point of being comical if he wasn't being appointed to the FBI. They talk about trying to steal the deep state, to steal King Trump's crown. And they have villains like Hillary Clinton and Adam Schiff. I mean, the ridiculousness goes on. And it's not just bad writing. It's what he's talking about in these children's books and in the adult books that he writes. And so, you know, Chuck Grassley, okay, you don't like Chris Wray. What are you talking about in terms of Kash Patel that makes him at all qualified temperamentally to do this job and to be in charge of our national security? It's mind-numbing to hear this kind of nonsense.
The Plot Against the King, at least one of the children's books you reference, Jeanne. Kash Patel vowed, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections, unquote. I'll read another quote to you, Rick Davis. Charles Kupperman, who supervised Patel in his role in the first Trump administration, says he is, quote, absolutely unqualified and untrustworthy, and goes on to say, quote, it is an absolute disgrace, unquote, for him to even be considered. What are these confirmation hearings going to be like?
Yeah, well, I have the utmost respect for Charlie Kupperman. He's a longtime national security official, you know, Republican, and knows what he's talking about. And look, this is what you get when you get Donald Trump. Elections have consequences. Donald Trump made it clear this is what he was going to do. Kash Patel is just an operative who will do Trump's bidding. I mean, anybody who thought this was going to be otherwise at the Justice Department didn't listen to Donald Trump every single day of the campaign. He's made all of his intentions clear. It's not clear when Kash Patel says he's going after people in the media what he means by that, what rules have been broken, what laws have been broken. He's still got a professional prosecution team in the Justice Department run by Pam Bondi, will be run by Pam Bondi, who had 8 years as a state attorney general and has a real track record behind her. So there is a adult at the gate, so to speak. But the reality is the American people chose Donald Trump because he said he wanted to declare war on the FBI. And Kash Patel is the operative who will do his bidding. And by the way, if it's not Kash Patel, it'll be somebody just like Kash Patel. And I think that's what the Republicans in the Senate have started to figure out. They got to hide by opposing, Matt Gaetz for the job as Attorney General. But now I think they're in the position of probably taking anybody he puts on the list.
Incredible. Just one more minute left here, Jeanne. When you consider the news over the weekend about RFK Jr., New York Times referring to his drug addiction, compulsive sexual behavior, and deep dives into conspiracy theories, or what we heard about Pete Hegseth from the New Yorker, from the Wall Street Journal, and his own mother, Penelope Hegseth. You see this, wrote the letter talking about him as a womanizer. Pam Bondi's just cruising to confirmation with all the rest of this going on here, right?
Yeah, she and Marco Rubio, no questions asked. Yeah, the email by Penelope Hegseth is just utterly devastating to read. And I'm trying to just wipe out of my memory RFK Jr. Did you see him in the shower, Joe, behind his wife while she was hawking her goods? And there he popped up. I mean, you couldn't write this as a made-for-TV movie and anybody would believe it or buy it. And yet here it all is. And of course, Jane Mayer in the New Yorker, a really devastating piece on Hegseth.
You said it. Yeah, another topless workout video, I guess, from RFK Jr. over the weekend. What is he, 70, James? He's 70. So I'm not putting any of those videos up. Jeanne, thank you. Rick Davis, Jeanne, Zaino, our signature panel here on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. To think we're talking about all this stuff. Can we get to the markets?
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
As we continue our conversation here with an eye on geopolitics, what's unfolding right now in Syria could have very important side effects for the future of the balance of power in the Middle East. What's happening in Syria, specifically in Aleppo over the weekend, caught a lot of people off guard. Rebel fighters pushing southward after taking over Aleppo in what is being framed as the most serious challenge to the al-Assad regime, which has been undergoing some very difficult times here, so it's saying a lot. To be specific, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the Islamist rebel group based in northwestern Syria, is driving this effort against Bashar al-Assad, and we wanted to spend some time with Hagar Chemali to talk about this a bit more. This is a real expert. You know her, of course, as the founder of Greenwich Media Strategies. We talk a lot about Mideast policy, but Hagar served as director for Syria and Lebanon as part of the National Security Council in the White House, and it's great to have you back, Hagar. How has this happened so quickly, and how real a threat is this to the Assad regime?
Sure. Well, Joe, first of all, thank you for mentioning that I was director for Syria and Lebanon, because it's really relevant to what we're talking about today, because I was there at the White House during the first 2 years of the Syria crisis. And this is a group I know fairly well. So first of all, we were all completely shocked. As you said, this is not something that was on the 2024 bingo card. It is a reaction to the weakness you're seeing on the part of Iran, Hezbollah for sure, and Russia. These are all Bashar al-Assad's allies. These are not only his allies, but these are the governments and groups that propped him up throughout Syria's civil war. In 2014, it looked like Bashar al-Assad was really close to losing because of the efforts of the opposition. And because Russia stepped in, first Iran and then Russia and Hezbollah, that is what ultimately propped him up and allowed him to retain power. And so the calculation on the part of HTS was clearly they see that his allies are all weak. Russia is distracted. Hezbollah has been, the head's been cut off. And so now would be a good time to launch this surprise offensive. And that's what you saw happening. But I had this reaction when I saw it happen. My reaction and analysis remains the same, even though several days have passed, which is that I believe this will be temporary. And the reason for that is that, first of all, Aleppo is a very important city to Bashar al-Assad, to the Syrian government. It is Syria's second largest city. It is also one of the more religiously diverse ones in Syria. It includes quite a large Christian group as well. Many of those Christians, some support Assad, some don't. Most of them just want protection from what they view as Sunni Islamist groups. And so it's an important city. It also has an international airport, by the way. This is a city that is important for Bashar al-Assad to retain control of. The reason they were able to take it was because of the surprise nature of the assault. But very quickly, you saw Russia step in and start bombarding strongholds in northern Syria called Idlib. That's where this group has its stronghold, where they control the area. And I don't think that they're going to step back. Even when these dictators and allies are weak, they are stronger together. And ultimately, the Syrian government, the Russian government, and Iran, they have airplanes, and these guys don't. And that is what is going to ultimately, I believe, not allow this group to retain control, to maintain control over this newfound territory that they've recently attacked.
Assad reportedly flew to Moscow following this new challenge to his regime. Hagar, are you surprised to learn that? And what will he bring home?
I'm not surprised to learn that. It's like he's visiting his big brother, frankly. Russia has been there for Syria since the very beginning. They share historical ties. Those ties go back decades. The Syria and Russia used to have cultural and student exchanges. It's a relationship that is very long in the making. And back when the Syria civil war started, the Russian government was there for Bashar al-Assad, and in 2014 actually stepped in with significant military support, with airplanes, with air supporting them from the top, and bombarding what they said was a counterterrorism effort to target ISIS. But they weren't just targeting ISIS, they were also targeting the Syrian opposition. And so for Bashar al-Assad to fly to Moscow is for him to go there and say, hey, I need your help to wrap this up quickly. I can't fall back on Hezbollah. Back when the Syria civil war was at its peak, Hezbollah, Nasrallah, the leader, now dead leader of Hezbollah, sent in his top men into Syria. Those top men don't exist anymore, and there's no leadership to even make that decision. Hezbollah at this point is reeling from the attacks by Israel. And so they're in no position to go into Syria and help. And so Bashar is going to kiss Putin's ring right now to ask for as much help as Putin can offer. And although Putin is distracted, and Putin himself is relying on other dictators like Kim Jong-un and Iran to support his effort in Ukraine, while they might be weaker alone, when these dictators unite, they are genuinely stronger together. I hate to admit that. I wish it weren't true, but it is. And so I do believe Putin is going to do what he can to support his buddy. And at the end of the day, the thing you have to remember is that Assad is proof that if you bulldoze your own people, he killed, the estimates are between 300,000 and 500,000 people. He killed 300,000 to almost 500,000 of his own people, and he still maintained power. He is not arrested. He lives in the lap of luxury in Damascus. And so he has no reason not to pursue that kind of strategy again with Russia behind him. And that's what he's going now to go do in Moscow, is plan that strategy.
Incredible stuff. The role the U.S. plays in this is what? Knowing that Joe Biden is winding things down. In fact, he just landed in Africa for a 3-day trip. You seem to think this is temporary. Will it be resolved by the time Donald Trump takes office?
For the U.S., the interests are a bit different because for the United States, our main interest is supporting the Kurds in northern Syria, ensuring that nothing happens to them. The Kurds were our strongest ally in countering ISIS in particular. They're a key reason why ISIS has not popped up again in northern Syria. The U.S., though, has had an inconsistent relationship, if you will, with HTS, with this group in particular that has pushed into Aleppo and is now moving more south. HTS at one point was sanctioned as a terrorist group. It was viewed back when I was in government, it was viewed as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but in Syria. And they have since changed. And so I don't want to paint them that way entirely. I also don't want to sugarcoat it for you. This is a group that has very conservative Islamic views. They say that they won't impose Sharia law, but they are a very conservative Islamic group. But they have since disavowed support for terrorism. They have disavowed their ties to terrorist groups. And many experts believe that maintains. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. I'm going to tell you that now because that is my experience in the U.S. government. But that said, that the U.S. does have a relationship with this group. Turkey in particular has a strong relationship with this group and has given them a lot of international assistance, which is what has allowed them to maintain control over the north of Syria. And so the United States at this effort, at this point, especially at the end, during this time when you're wrapping up a presidency, President Biden is traveling in Africa. You have Amos Hochstein, who's trying to broker another ceasefire deal in Gaza. That's going to be their focus. When it comes to Syria, the only thing they're going to be able to maintain is to try and to argue that the Kurds remain safe, that nothing happens to the Christian communities in Syria, and also that this group is aware that they shouldn't bite off more than they can chew, because what could happen is that Assad only retaliates with Russia and Iran behind him to crush civilians once again, and that is likely what he will do.
In our remaining couple of minutes here then, Hagar, turn the page to the next administration. What does a DNI Tulsi Gabbard inside the White House mean then for the U.S. relationship with Syria?
That's a good question. I had a hard time maintaining a straight face. Tulsi Gabbard, for viewers who don't know, traveled to Syria back during the Syria civil war, said that Bashar al-Assad was not an enemy of the United States. So then she tried to retract that. And she also rejected intelligence assessments that confirmed with high confidence that Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. I can tell you again, having been on the other side of that, when those chemical attacks happened, that the bar that the intelligence community must reach to make that assessment and to make that assessment with high confidence is a very high bar. So to have somebody who has publicly rejected the assessments of our intelligence community to now be leading that position, and on top of it to have shown a desire to be cozier or to look at Bashar al-Assad through rose-colored glasses is concerning, because that position is the one that briefs the president every day in the presidential daily brief and briefs the president on our biggest threats. And so you don't want that person viewing President Assad in any way as a rosy person, as somebody who ensures stability. And you also don't want that person just blatantly rejecting the assessments of our intelligence analysts who truly serve at the pleasure of the president, who are not partisan, and who do remarkable work. And so that's my concern with Tulsi Gabbard at the top.
Yeah, I can tell. Hagar, we're out of time, but do you think she'll be confirmed with everything you just said?
I think it will be tenuous, but I just don't think she's the most concerning for some of the other candidates. And I believe that that's where you're going to see, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard. She could pass, but there are others I think would not pass muster before her. So we'll see.
Too many plates spinning at once. Hagar Chemali, thank you so much for the insights. And great to have you back here on Bloomberg with Greenwich Media Strategies, former director, Syria and Lebanon on the National Security Council.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We wanted to focus on this Monday as the Trump transition picks get all the attention along with the Biden pardon. This is critically important. And we're joined now by an expert. He's just back from a trip to Europe where he spent time with political and business leaders, and he's all ours, at least for now. Brett Bruen, President and CEO of the Global Situation Room. Brett, it's great to have you back. Of course, as a veteran diplomat, I know your eyes are on Syria, and this is an area of the world that you've dealt with in the past. How is this happening so quickly, and what does it mean for Bashar al-Assad?
Well, the short answer, Joe, is there's an imbalance of power. And I think what has transpired in Lebanon, as well as regionally with Iran, and listeners will know that Bashar al-Assad gets most, if not all, of his support from Tehran. And the hits that they have taken through their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, are starting to hurt. And there are, I think, a number of actors, HTS, as you mentioned before, one of them that smell blood in the water and feel like this is a moment to strike. And clearly they struck with great effectiveness.
Are they right? So far, it seems they are.
They are. And I think the key question that is looming over Damascus at the moment is whether or not Assad's forces will be able to regroup. Now, they do have an air advantage. It isn't, however, the air advantage they enjoyed earlier, about 10 years ago, when first there was an uprising across the Syrian landscape. Now there are drones. There are other unmanned air capabilities that the rebel forces can use. There's obviously also just a very different power dynamic in the region. And on top of this, Russia plays a big part in supporting Assad. They've got their own hardware problems in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are upping their efforts as Trump looks to take power here in Washington again. So this isn't a good situation for Assad. I would give his odds, better than 50-50 at this point, but it's still, quite frankly, a bit of an unknown.
Let's talk a bit about Russia and Iran then, because it's pretty easy to connect the dots here, as you are doing. When it comes to Iran, the potential here for the dismantling of its proxy network that we've talked about so much with regard to Israel is great. What will we see happen to Tehran if Bashar al-Assad falls?
Well, and what's interesting here, yes, if Assad falls, who steps into this void? HTS formerly was the extension of al-Qaeda in Syria. They have moderated their position over the years. They've tried, one, just to appeal to a Syrian population that doesn't necessarily take well to some of those extremist ideologies. But on the other hand, I think what you're seeing is a shifting in some of these groups. It isn't something that is static. There's obviously different rebel groups, and they join forces, and sometimes they're fighting against one another. Other times, as now, they're fighting together. What we don't want to see, Joe, is a Libya scenario where we end up seeing the fall of a leader like Gaddafi, and into the void come a whole lot of warring factions. And so what's really important here is that the international community start to step up now and preserve some, coalition, preserve some semblance of stability, and hopefully get a plan in place for how we're going to handle this thing potentially post-Assad.
Wow. Give us the view from Moscow then. Of course, Vladimir Putin is stretched thin in Ukraine. Does he have any influence left here?
Well, he has some, and you saw Russian air assets deployed in defense of Syrian troops, and yet at the same time, he hasn't got a lot, Joe. He will have a small presence in Syria. He doesn't have a lot more to give. So when Assad's, nervously picking up the phone and calling Moscow, the other end's going to say, well, good luck, but we don't have much more to send you.
As Bloomberg is reporting here, as Aleppo fell to rebels over the weekend, the Syrian president flew to Moscow. What does that tell us?
Well, we have long known that Assad was essentially an asset of Moscow, an extension of Iran. And so he is going, to make that personal plea and to try and to push to get whatever he can to defend against these rebel troops. But again, there isn't much, especially as Russia is worried about what the next month and a half has in store for Ukraine. Zelensky is going to push to get the best possible negotiating position he can, with Trump coming in and talking about this big deal that he has in the works.
What does this all mean for the Biden administration, Brett Bruin? Joe Biden, of course, abroad right now. He just touched down in Angola a short time ago, but actually had the wherewithal to announce a ceasefire with Hezbollah last week, is reportedly working on one in Gaza. Does this White House have any influence about outcomes in Syria, or is this about the Trump administration?
Well, look, Biden's influence is certainly waning, and they're trying to make a good effort to secure something with Hamas before the clock ticks midnight on January 20th. But at the same time, I think, quite frankly, a lot of these leaders know that Biden is old news, that he is no longer able to yield and wield the kind of power. And so you're going to see the Netanyahus, you're going to see even the Putins trying to hold on for Trump to come in and hopefully to get a better deal.
You know, we're having this conversation, Brett. We haven't mentioned the name Tulsi Gabbard yet, and I'm not sure that we should. But she's facing a confirmation hearing to be the nation's top spy, essentially, knowing of her dalliances with Bashar al-Assad, her opinion of the veracity of his regime, essentially her support, if I can call it that, for him. How does this color the way senators will look at this matter when it comes time for confirmation?
Well, this is unfortunate timing if you're Tulsi Gabbard, because it is going to bring to the fore both what Assad did in the past, dropping chemical weapons on civilians in Syria, but it also, quite frankly, is likely to bring more atrocities. And Gabbard is going to have a tough time explaining why, in the midst, the height, in fact, Joe, of some of those atrocities, she went without any clear diplomatic mission other than to provide legitimacy, other than to provide a propaganda point for Assad to use. So is this the kind of person that you want making those major decisions about U.S. intelligence and how to deploy our intelligence assets? I think a lot of senators will have those questions.
You better believe it. This is someone who has said that Assad is not the enemy of the United States. They're going to have images, video of her with him that is shown in these confirmation hearings, no?
Well, and it raises the question, in terms of vetting, you normally, in a normal transition, would want to have checked these sort of things. Did that happen? Maybe. But quite frankly, it's just a bad split screen for Trump. He's going to have to justify why this person who's had some pretty unsavory dalliances with both Bashar al-Assad as well as even with Moscow and Moscow's propaganda, this is the person that's going to keep us safe. And Joe, at the end of the day, that's what the job's about. And I think, with some of these national security positions, it's really, really important. Fine. You want to offer up some party favors to the donors or others who supported you, political allies like Gabbard, but do you really want to put them in that sensitive position that keeps us all safe?
Mm-hmm. Brett, while you're with us here, we're looking at Joe Biden step off Air Force One in Angola. He did promise to visit Africa before he left the White House. He's making good on that promise with just weeks to go here. Does this administration play a role internationally from here on out between now and January 20th? Does he, in fact, have any influence as we wait for Donald Trump globally?
Well, it's interesting. He's going to Angola in part to celebrate U.S. investment in the country, in the infrastructure, and as a play against Beijing to try and reassert American relevance, quite frankly, on the continent. I served half my diplomatic career in Africa, and we are losing the game when it comes to influence, not just against China, but even, going back to Russia. Russian Wagner forces have been deployed across the Sahel in West Africa with great effect, forcing out peacekeepers, forcing out even some of our diplomatic missions. So Biden is showing up in an African continent that is radically different than when he took office. And Joe, I think, unfortunately, it illustrates how ineffective a lot of his diplomatic initiatives have been. Even as well-intentioned as they are, you can't look at Africa today and say they are a stronger ally of the U.S. than they were 4 years ago.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, Brett, for the remainder of this administration, the confirmation process, and whatever the next Trump administration brings here internationally. So thank you for the insights today. And let's stay close on all these issues. Brett Bruen is President and CEO of the Global Situation Room, a veteran of foreign policy and diplomacy here in Washington, D.C., and a perfect voice for us today as we keep our eyes on what is happening in Syria. Remember, we had this conversation. This one is not over yet. These rebel fighters continue their way southward, and we're still waiting, of course, for resolution in Gaza. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.